How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by the co-founder of Elemental Formulations and a coach with the Strength Guys. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Ben Esgro. How are you doing?
I'm good. I like the one and only. That's a good qualifier. I think I'm going to require everybody to introduce me that way.
That's it. Yeah, I always think it has to be. Everyone needs to be the one and only.
Yeah.
I think it's a good boost. How are you, Ben? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world?
I'm doing well. I can't complain. Nothing really dramatically new. I mean, I think like everybody, still trying to adapt to the ever-changing landscape of post-COVID life, but also, every other factor that, whether it's directly or indirectly related to that, stuff with prices of everything going crazy. I mean, as a business owner that really hijacks things in terms of how to manage all of it. And then just living life is a little bit differently with, paying insane amounts just to get anywhere else. And there's just no way to avoid those added costs as a consumer, but also as a business owner, because shipping and everything else is impacted by it. So I think in that way, just like everybody else, I'm adjusting to the new times, but everything is well. And just doing my best to enjoy every day and take it one day at a time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's interesting, because obviously, being in the UK as well, obviously prices of everything is going up, and it can be challenging, especially when working as coaches or looking at supplements or anything like that. It can be challenging to if people's circumstances have changed or anything like that. So it's good to see, because you were at the Worlds in South Africa, weren't you?
So I wasn't. That was actually Jason. It actually perfectly kind of relates to that last point, is like costs of travel. We could really only justify one or two people going. Right. So we kind of went with the person that I think was most important, because he had lifters there lifting. I didn't have any lifters. Like, of course, he had Taylor. So it just made more sense for him to be there than both of us.
Yeah, because with everything, I know obviously it's good to see competitions coming back, but obviously within powerlifting, it's not like the Football World Cup, where it would be nice if everyone got paid to go over there. So yeah, I can completely understand the challenges.
Not yet, but honestly, Sheffield may change that. So that's the first meet that I'm aware of where they're going to pay for coaches to go, and not just the athletes. So I mean, I've continued to be of the opinion that Sheffield is going to be a game changer in terms of powerlifting, not just for the competitor, but I think the way it changes people's expectations of a meet, and it changes what people prioritize in terms of what they're preparing for the most. Whereas it used to be Worlds or Nationals, I think Sheffield is going to, take that place.
Yeah, I'm quite excited for that, because being based in Leeds, it's literally like down the road from me. So when it was originally announced, then obviously COVID happened and everything.
Yeah.
That is exciting, because it was interesting. Obviously, I saw Taylor Atwood put out, people were asking questions about his total, but it was interesting to hear people talk about Sheffield, even though it's a little bit a while away. So that is interesting, especially with the prize money that's there.
Of course,
that's there, which will be it'll be exciting to see. I did obviously a brief introduction at the start there, but for everyone listening who might not know your background, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Sure, that's tough. You might want to cut me off if I start getting too long, but I think the most logical starting point would be sort of what got me into fitness in the first place, which is I was in high school. I was a really skinny kid. I rode BMX bikes. Most people probably wouldn't know that. So like ramps and like X Games type stuff, that was really, I think, one of my first real passions. And then I just wanted to be lean. At that time, Fight Club came out. Like everybody wanted the Brad Pitt Fight Club body. I was one of those people. So I dieted, and I think I quickly realized how much of a fool I was in terms of knowledge of nutrition. I got really skinny, but when I say really skinny, it means lean and bony, like lanky and just stringy. So I think that was my first foray into nutrition. And then once I did get lean and had some muscle, I realized, oh, I'm really skinny underneath this. And that started the real rabbit hole journey, which was now almost 20 years ago of me getting into actually understanding the ins and outs of physiology. So I'd say that was probably the responsible first moment of the first moment that's responsible for me getting into the academic end of things. So I decided to go for undergrad for nutrition. While I was there, I always wanted the mix. I'm like that. You'll see this is a recurring thing of my personality where I like to mix fields and see how seemingly unrelated or loosely related fields actually bridge each other a lot more. So when I was in undergrad, I decided to also minor in exercise science because I wasn't getting enough of the exercise phys that I wanted. And my favorite classes were like the biochem we took for nutrition, or the like the stuff about macronutrients, digestion, absorption, the clinical stuff. So that mix, I'd say, turned me on to the ex-phys side of it. I knew I wanted to, when I graduated, I knew I wanted to do more. I went for my master's in sports nutrition. And then that really started the point of, I'd say, the lifetime learner, like the never-ending journey of knowledge accrual. So I was able to stay out for 3 years after I did that. Then I went back again for pharmaceutical chemistry. I think that would sound like it's a complete jump in fields. It sort of was, but I think the backstory of how that came to be and was relatable is I've always been juggling this mix between coaching and my own programming as someone who has always identified as an athlete. So my own journey as an athlete. And then the other side is the supplement end of things, which is, understanding chemistry, understanding pharmacology. And I felt that I got to a point where I sort of stumbled upon success in the supplement realm as a formulator, where I was able to make formulas based upon my experience as a consumer in the field and of using the products and just being a picky consumer. But I wasn't satisfied with my ability to actually formulate something from scratch, meaning like on a more of like a philosophy of why these ingredients work basis versus an experience one. And I'm a believer that the best knowledge is when you have about 50-50 of both, where you understand the experiential side, but you also understand the academic, the theoretical side. So I knew I needed more knowledge theoretically in chem. I felt that was my weakness coming out after the sports nutrition masters. So I went back and I knew, again, I wanted to blend. I wanted a blend of chemistry, but also chemistry as it relates to drug design and drug metabolism, which is pharmacology or pharmacy.
Yeah, interesting, because especially I thought that was speaking about the research side of things, the academic side of things, and obviously at the other end as well. From your own training, was that kind of a natural progression? Because obviously you mentioned there of wanting to learn about these things. Was that a natural progression for you to look at both ends and sort of from the did you feel as though there was maybe, I don't know what's the right phrase to say this, but maybe a flaw in some supplements? Because obviously a lot of people do there's loads of supplements out there and people will pick and choose quite a lot, or some people will just buy the first one that they see. Was that a natural progression, and did you feel as though you could add something to that area, if you like?
Yeah, I felt like it was too much marketing. And that's because when I first started that journey, like I said, as a teenager, I believed all of it. I bought into it because I thought that's the standard. These companies probably have to prove it before they can market it that way. And that's obviously not the case. So I started from a pure belief standpoint. And then as I got more educated, became more of a skeptic. And that's why I always encourage everybody to be more of a skeptic when it comes to really anybody making these promises that sound like a stretch, or they sound like they shouldn't be believable. But I think, yeah, that was a big part for me, was seeing how the industry operated as it was then, and what seemed to me to be wide open in terms of like, wow, somebody just needs to be honest and legitimate, and you could build a business on that. Like that's the best of both worlds. I don't have to be a liar. I could make good products that I want to use and that other people want to use and it will work for them, and I don't need to lie about it. That's to me, that's a win-win. That's perfect. I've always said that, you know, I didn't start a business because I'm a businessman. I never identified as that. I think it's more so I'm a very curious person, and I like to not have limitations on my ability to chase solutions and problems. And it just so happens that business allows you to kind of self-fund your own research without needing to have, you know, an institution or go out and ask these other companies to fund you, which obviously inserts bias into everything. So I like to try to do it as clean as I possibly can. And I like to just chase rabbit holes as they come up. I like to view it almost as if I'm like if you've seen, if you're aware of any professors who are like tenured and they're well funded and they're allowed to just chase whatever they want. I'd like to think I'm in this idealistic world. That's me, just outside of academia, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was a really good way of looking at it, in terms of, you know, having the business allows you to do your own research, because it is one of those things where, oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this, and it, you know, it's that thought process of, you know, everything is behind closed doors in universities or anything like that, but doesn't always have to be the case on that. Obviously, you mentioned
one real quick thing to add on there, and I think that's the problem. Like, I don't want to come at it as like this major critic of academia or higher education or any of that. I think it's just that one of the weaknesses is that it's tends to be slow. Like, to sort of maybe jump a little bit into something else, what we probably will end up talking about is like programming is like, I'd say back in 2014, you know, people like myself and Mike Zordos were having conversations about things that have only just sort of come out in the past couple of years in the research of being published. And, you know, so there's this lag period. And I think for me, I like to, it's harder to wait. I think it's okay for the consumers to have to wait, but I hate that answer of like, we just don't know yet. We just don't know yet. Like that's sort of a cop-out to me. I think you can make inroads to answers well ahead without saying, oh, well, just the research isn't done yet, so I can't take a stance. I don't like that.
Yeah, I think it's that thing of, you know, because there's always that, I don't know if it's an argument, but that side of things of research is catching up to what's actually being done in the trenches, if you like, from that, and it's always having that balance. Because when it comes out in the research, it's like, okay, so now we have the answers. Now it's kind of approved, if you like. Interestingly, it was actually my girlfriend's graduation this week, and there was a lot of people getting their sort of doctorates, and it's kind of all of their research that's coming out. It's kind of like, wow, that's taken, you know, a long time, and then from there there'll be other processes to go from there, which is all really good, but you know, it is that time side of things. One thing that you mentioned there, obviously, not being a businessman, but being able to use it as an opportunity to do research and, you know, find out things. How have you found, maybe a little bit of a tangent, but how have you found, especially with everything that's gone on over the last couple of years with COVID and all those sorts of things, still trying to have that curiosity, if you like, in terms of research, but then also, you know, trying to be a businessman as well and manage all those things? Did, you know, one shift up the priority list compared to the other, or how did you find that?
Yeah, I'd like to think that because of the way that the businesses have been built, so De Novo Nutrition prior and then Elemental now, we've bootstrapped, so we never had outside investors, and that forces you to have to be resourceful and sort of thrifty. So while you never want to have to operate in a period like that, it's almost like you can adjust and adapt by doing certain things that are not necessities, whereas I think a big umbrella corporation might have a harder time doing them. So like a practical answer to your question is like, so we turned off, running ads on Instagram, and we just focused on organic customer base, return customers, instead of dumping so much into paying for those ads and just the clicks that, is debatable whether those are going to, be return customers and people rely on. And obviously there's expenses associated with that. You're paying Facebook to run those things. You're paying someone to manage that ad set and all of that stuff. So has it been difficult? Yes. Have we thrived? I don't think I'd say that, but we're surviving, and we're able to make ends meet by just adjusting and doing things differently. And I think a big word is pivot. I think as a smaller company, it's a little bit easier to pivot. So yeah, it's harder to be on someone's radar as much as a big company because you're not doing so many outreach efforts, but it's a lot easier to pivot and make adjustments. One of them being like, so we're going to stop making whey protein. That's a lot harder thing to do if you're Optimum Nutrition, who runs probably millions of units every time they do a run. Like that's a lot harder to say. Like maybe they'll say 2 years down the road we'll stop making protein. They'll never stop making protein, but you get what I'm saying. So yeah, I think it's figuring out also as this new landscape evolves of like what seem to be the products that people need the most, where can we compete the most versus other areas. Like again, like we're never going to be able to price compete with someone like an Optimum on raw material costs of whey protein or Gatorade. Like as these new bigger players get in to food supplements like whey protein, like protein bars, like RTDs, stuff like that, we just can't compete with them because we don't do the volume they do. So we need to do products that they just really don't do. So, we just change our focus. Like, okay, maybe we can make different tailored version of pre-workouts, different tailored versions of like a popular product for us has always been Utopia. So like a cognitive product, but, just change our approach a little bit of how we're going about it in areas where we're not trying to compete with these massive elephants in the room, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's obviously mentioning there, knowing that there are bigger companies out there, and it's similar to sort of the coaching side of things. During COVID, everyone all of a sudden became an online coach, and that was it then became really saturated because it's like, I know, well, if I can't coach people in person, I'm going to do the online coach. And in terms of your values, in terms of the standard or the quality of product that you wanted to provide, obviously I know you've mentioned maybe looking at products that other companies don't produce, but what were sort of the challenges in terms of maybe sticking to your values of do you know what, actually we want to focus on quality of that? Because when we speak, like I said, when we speak about the coaching side of things, it could be easy to, well, I'm just going to do an online coach. I'm just going to do the same as everybody else and kind of, go down an avenue that could actually be more destructive rather than beneficial.
Yeah. I think I'm going to steal, something from your introduction, which is the one and only. That's very appealing to me. So I think what I'm always looking for is, how can we or I genuinely add value? And not do what everybody else is doing, not just offer the same thing, because I think that's very stale and boring. And then it's just marketing. It's 100% marketing. So I think by trying to push that needle of like, what is not being looked at, what's a new way of looking at perspectives on things. This applies to both coaching and product formulation. And how can value be added in a way that seems that it's not? And to me, I guess I'll answer it on both sides. Like, I think on the product side, I think now everybody is jumped on the science-based, evidence-based thing. And I think what's lacking is still transparency. So companies saying that they represent certain things, but not doing anything to validate it. So like not showing their lab tests when they say we're certified, drug-free, or, what's on our label is definitely what's in our products. That's still not really being done. I think on the other side is companies still are getting into putting better ingredients in, but they're still underdosing them and just heavily marketing on this is here, and they're not. So people have this level of understanding and knowledge that like this, let's just say creatine monohydrate is important, but they don't know what amount it's important in. And I think, you know, that second step is what's missing universally in fitness. Is there's more content and information than ever, but there's a lot more perceived knowledge than there is deep knowledge. So, you know, like if you go out and say, we're going to make a slide deck and post it in our stories on Instagram, I think the important understanding is, yes, you've received information and you might know that macronutrients are important for your budget for nutrition or volume's important for training, but that's tip of the iceberg. Like that's maybe the top 5%. You've gotten a really important nugget there, but you don't have the context that actually builds around it of how to practically apply that and change that in given scenarios. And I think what we need more than anything now is deep knowledge. And I don't think we'll ever stop needing it. I just think now, because there's so much more information out there and everybody's fighting for quick eyes, quick jolts of like, teach me 10 years of information in 10 seconds, you're gonna lose something in that. And I think it's important that people recognize that. I'm not saying that because it means everybody needs to come to me and get information on my products. I think it's more so, again, a universal thing of like, just understand that you do have really good answers. You have good leads, better leads than I would have had from muscle magazines, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the journey's over. Like, let your curiosity still pull you. If you learn that volume is important, think about, you know, well, why is it important? In what context might that be wrong? Like it's all like sort of going meta with your questioning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. There was the one thing that you mentioned there, obviously, when you mentioned about creatine and like how much creatine is beneficial. And I sign up to Mass, so obviously that comes out every month.
Yeah, Mass is wonderful.
Yeah, if no one hasn't signed up to that, 100% sign up to it. It is research studies, but they're a lot easier to read from them put on there. And I can't remember which month it was, but I think it was about, I don't think it was about caffeine. I think creatine, sorry. I think it was about caffeine, about how much caffeine is actually beneficial out of the whole supplements. And when you actually start reading about it, it's like, right, okay, so are people putting less in or more in? Because everyone's sort of chasing that optimal and those fine tweaks, if you like. And I think as a sport, or well, strength sports in general, are getting a lot more professional, and it's looking for that for those things of, right, well, we know that creatine or caffeine is beneficial, but why? What do we need from there? A key word that you've mentioned a lot is the curiosity, side of things. How has that sort of helped or impacted your coaching, whether it becomes to nutrition or powerlifting? How has that, or how do you put that across in terms of, getting the best out of the people that you work with?
I think it's always a mixed bag. I don't think you can have, I think it's hard to have success as a coach without the social end, because buy-in's such a huge part of the process of people believing. Like there is a cult part of being a coach that you'd be a fool to not admit is an aspect of it, where if people believe that you're great, there's a lot better chance that you will have great results for them. So I think in that sense, I've been lucky to work with some really high profile people. And that has certainly helped. But at the other end, I'd like to think that people have stayed, and people also come in because there's the belief that it's going to work, and then it does. So I think there's always this need of me to feel like I am adequately doing justice to whatever their belief is coming in. And I think that comes from just being a curious person. I mean, that's been the case my entire life. It's just who I am. And I think if you want to get into the psychological side of it, is like, answers give me comfort in a world where you're not given a textbook of like the book of life and here's all the answers. It's more so you're dropped in and you got to figure it out. And for me, I wouldn't say I'm an anxious person. It's more so that like I just like to feel like I'm making sense of the world, and the world is so complicated in terms of like social things. I feel like you'll never make sense because people will bend and they're just too fluid. But like the true physical sciences, I think why they're appealing to me is you can get definitive answers that can't be muddied up by people's interpretation or opinion. Like 2 + 2 will always be 4. Like a reaction, if you understand the conditions perfectly, will always proceed in the way that it's predicted. And I think what is both comforting and then usable practically for that is if you can tease out the noise and the real key variables, you can predict the impact of many things and write a much more effective plan for somebody. And I think to sort of circle back on something we talked about before of like things that are missing is there's always these aspects of now this is specifically to focus on coaching. Sorry, I sort of seamlessly jump in and out, and I feel important to specify which I'm talking about at any given point. But I think with coaching, what's fascinating is there's always going to be that variable of genetic component, like really well-known coaches or people who are perceived to be great. Part of it is that they have built up a persona that they attract the better athletes, and that does exist for sure. And the reality is like a lot of success definitely depends on the beginning potential of that lifter, the genetic potential of that lifter. So I think, I guess I'm always in this race with myself is like, I'm almost more interested, don't get me wrong, I'm interested in working with high potential lifters. I still do. I like working with elite lifters for sure, but sometimes I'm more attracted to see, almost to validate my knowledge and understanding of programming, to work with somebody who is not genetically elite, and can I still produce results? Because then that's an extra layer of validation, where, a lot of times, let's take someone like Russ Orhey. Like I do feel like you could probably put him on just about any program, and he probably responded really well to like doing 5-3-1. Or even someone like Leah, I think she probably would have responded, Leah Bevois, would have responded well to whatever beginning program she was doing, because she comes from, she's got more type 2 fibers, all of these genetic factors into it. So that's still fascinating, because that is a very unique case study and cross section, but it's only a small percentage of the enormous bell curve of population of people who are existing in doing powerlifting. So I think I'm always trying to see, okay, what are the universal things where it won't just work for a Russ or a Leah, it'll work for everybody. Now there's going to be, and this is again where things blend into each other, and I apologize for blending maybe too much into each other, but like imagine how much easier nutrition prescription, exercise prescription, drug prescription would be if you could just say, everybody, a 2,000 calorie diet works for everybody. We know that's not true. So what is that saying at the core of things is that dose is important. Dose is really an essential variable in the equation. So like imagine if you went into the drugstore and you said like, I got pain in my shoulder, how much Advil should I take? And they just take one pill for everybody. They give you one pill. We know that doesn't exist. It's when you go to physician, you get a prescription. If it's not working, they dose adjust. So I think a big part of the coaching relationship and all of that stuff is constant assessment and dose adjustment.
Yeah. There was quite a lot of things that I was, and
yeah, sorry, I went everywhere. I apologize. That was like, blah.
No, that's why I stuck with the name Strength Chat, because for the questions that I've written down, I think I've only actually asked one question that I originally put down. I like tangents and seeing where the conversation goes. And one thing that you said at the start, obviously, for elite end athletes, that's quite a small population, probably in any sport. And because they're at such a level, it's maybe small tweaks, and that small tweak or that small change or that addition could last for quite a long time before you need to make a change. Whereas for the general population who are trying to maybe progress in their journey, we'll just keep on the topic of powerlifting. It might be bigger chunks, and then it might be like, oh, okay, so now we need to change something else now for that progression. Would you kind of agree on that in terms of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a really good quote that we have in our sheets when we write programs for people with TSG, and it's like, talent sets the floor, work sets the ceiling, and I think that's pretty universally true of any sport. When you're talking about high level athletics, is usually there's what people call, when they see somebody do something and very quickly be successful, they're a natural at it. I think that's very true. Is when you come in, you see your floor level. Like, for example, let's use myself instead of using a bunch of people outside in the field. I'm someone who is not a strong person naturally. Like I weighed in high school 170 something. This is pounds, whatever that converts to for kilos. Yeah, I'm not that quick with it. And I couldn't bench plates. I couldn't bench 135 for the first year of training. That's an extraordinarily weak bench for a guy. It took me a year to do plates. It took me another 2 or 3 to do 225, and then it took me another 4 or 5 to do 315, and that's the most I've ever done. Now weighing over 200 pounds, like a little bit over 200. So I think for me to have the expectation that I'm going to be Julius Maddox or one of these guys who benches 700, like that's just unrealistic, because what belief is important. It's okay for me to believe I could do that, and maybe it'll take me further, but to realistically think that that's going to happen is so low probability, because I did get an answer, whether I want to accept that answer in the beginning or not. I did get an answer, which is like, this is where my genetics say I fall within the ability level. And I think there's many people who probably sit under a bench and maybe hit 225 the first time they bench press or something. And you are getting an answer, whether at that time you know it or not. You're getting an answer of what your long-term potential may be. Doesn't mean you can't get stronger, but it just defines where you are and then where your ceiling probably is.
From experience of coaching, and one thing that you mentioned is obviously, you know, being able to predict answers sometimes, you know, when coaching. Does it differ between the limitations that elite level athletes may have compared to general population who are progressing through our national level athletes, and then managing those expectations, if that kind of makes sense what I've said there?
I'll give you a short answer just to have you confirm if I'm going where you wanted with the question. I think the biggest separator with elite lifters, because then we're assuming that everybody has pretty high level potential. I think then it comes down to discipline and belief. I genuinely think that. And I think like the perfect case of that, and it's why I didn't mention Taylor before when I said Ross or Leah. Don't get me wrong, Taylor is genetically definitely gifted. But if you look at his competition history, he was not winning. He was not really dominating in sort of the beginning. He was always strong. He was always very strong. But I think the willingness to buy into the plan and then do whatever is needed to win, I think is really what then takes you from competitive at an elite level to dominating at an elite level. And I'll just use the universal sports analogies, and I use it in a more recent podcast as well, is like, look at people like Tom Brady. You'd say on raw potential, he's not the best talented quarterback, but dude, that guy works hard, and he is a student of the game 100%. Like, he is teasing in and out certain things. He's trying to see where he can pick out any advantages and things like that. And I'd like to think that, you know, what we did at TSU with Taylor was kind of help bring that part to the great genetic part. And I think that's what makes him so hard to beat, is, you know, he totally buys in to, you know, if we're going to win the war, not the battle, in terms of attempt selection and how we're going to position ourselves by the end of the meet where you end up versus losing and missing a lift. You know, all those things are, you know, there's a chess component to powerlifting, which you may or may not recognize until you lose and you're like, oh shit, I was stronger than that dude, but he beat me.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, definitely. It is that, and it's more of exactly what you said there, of, you know, buying into the plan. And I know we've spoken about it a lot, or mentioned it a lot, in terms of powerlifting becoming a lot more professional, and there's a lot more things. It isn't just oh well, we're just going to lift as heavy as we can. That's not the plan. You know, you're building that total. And I had a podcast with Mike Shearer, who had been using flywheel training.
Yep.
My voice is going. Who had done flywheel training, which is again other things that are incorporating in there, adding that into the curiosity when it comes around, you know, coaching and trying to find answers. Do you think a lot more things are coming into powerlifting and using, well, okay, well, what can we use from this to then add that in, to then add more benefit, whether it's from a nutrition standpoint or a training standpoint or anything like that?
I think that's essential for progression of understanding and knowledge. And because think about it, if we only live on what's been known and established, how do things progress? Everybody just follows what's been known and what's comfortable. And when you look in any field, like pioneers or revolutions in fields, especially in science, it comes from somebody who's, you know, this perceived outsider and looks at the problem a whole different way and like unlocks something that we didn't even, like, wasn't even on the radar. I mean, that's, like I said, it's part of scientific innovation. It's part of, I think, you know, product innovation. It's part of, you know, every aspect of life when we talk about people who push the boundaries. And, you know, that's why I love having conversations with Mike. You know, Mike's a personal friend, but I think professionally, Mike and I love our rapport. And I like the way he thinks. Mike is a fantastic thinker. And I think a lot of those things, trying to pull inspiration from outside, are things that I'd use as well. Like I've mentioned a few times now recently that I've gotten into golf, which is really like polar opposite from powerlifting. But now, since everything's seemingly blending so much more, it's not so polar opposite anymore. And a lot of the best golfers in the world are lifting weights more. They're getting stronger. They're doing things that strength athletes do. And I think to make it relatable to the conversation, you know, it's opened my eyes to things before that I thought I sort of dismissed in training, like really, really more purist power training, meaning like using more bands, using low percentage of 1RM, moving things at extremely high velocity without being super high load. That's really been a huge chunk of my recent training now, both for body and longevity purposes, but also for direct sport specific benefit, because I'm trying to get club head speed to hit the ball further. And it's been, I think there's been two things that have been really eye-opening moments for me. One is how low the maintenance level of both stimulation and volume is to keep what you have. Like I really haven't lost, to my knowledge, and by body weight and body comp visually in the mirror would indicate, I haven't lost any muscle from dropping probably my training volume by, I'd say, man, 75%. And
right.
As far as loads, my loads are at least 50% lower. But I think the other end is, I think I would use bands in training or do power stuff when I was either bored or when I couldn't load heavy. And it's had a much bigger effect in, I don't feel like I'm stronger, but maintaining my level of strength a lot better without needing to go up to that high percent of 1 RP or 1 RM. Now, I don't think I'd hit PRs. I'm not making that statement. But for me, when I use the bench analogy, like 225 is like a benchmark for me. Like how many reps I do that for is a pretty good indication of where my strength is on the bench press. And I've really held pretty consistent there by just purely doing power training, not doing any strength training as far as how many reps I can get at 225. So it's fascinating. Not something I'm ever going to apply to, I think, our elite powerlifters. But one other thing that I will take away is by being dropped into this new movement pattern for my body and seeing the technical aspects of how your body moves through space with the swing, I feel like it's helped me communicate better form adjustments when I'm trying to help someone technically move through a power lift. Because a golf swing is a lot more awkward than a power lift. It's a weird movement, and every joint is kind of hinging a little differently. And if you've watched anybody golf, it's a hard thing to do with high accuracy until you kind of figure it out. So I think for me, I've taken a step back by giving, because of what I've found by trying to learn this new movement pattern is, I think I've taken a less is more approach where I'm not trying to give everybody every detail of what's happening at every joint segment to move better as a power lifter, because it's overwhelming and then you're thinking too much and you can't be athletic. So I've really taken much more of a minimalistic reductionist approach to, let's just do one thing this week that we're going to adjust. You become an expert in that one adjustment, then we'll move on to the next one. Whereas before, I would pick out everything that's wrong and just dump that on people. And that was probably not the best.
I had to smile when you mentioned about playing golf. So it seems as though, especially over the last couple of weeks, everyone I've spoken to has taken up golf. And I've literally said to, if you speak to anyone that knows me, I always say, do you know what? I'd really like to play golf. And I think it's just more to go on like golfing holidays or something like that. So I think that's definitely something I'm going to have to look into. But the last bit that you said there about, changing your approach from learning something different, I always think that whether it's something you can add into training or a coaching style or whatever it may be, you can always learn from something and add that in. You hear about, so I follow a lot of rugby, having played that before I started powerlifting, and you hear coaches about going to different sports. Obviously, they're not going to bring football tactics to rugby, but it's culture. It's how do you build that environment or coaching style, which I think is important, and ties into what we've spoken about in terms of the curiosity side of things. One thing that I wanted to touch on as well is, when we're maybe pushing those boundaries of trying new things. You said there about, the pioneers to try and be like, right, how do we set that standard and then maintain that standard and then probably push the boundaries of that standard, if that makes sense. Is that something that you strive for, to keep that standard, even if we are, changing things around, maybe don't get it right all the time, but, still thinking, right, do you know what, this is a quality of service. This is the standard that we're aiming for.
Yeah, I think I like to think as life, not just as a journey against the outside world, but as a journey against your own ego. And I think that maybe I should say a struggle against your own ego. And I think, ego can get in the way of so many things. If you're trying to live up to this perceived standard of everybody else, or trying to not make mistakes and not trip. And I think one thing that I've found consistently in my life is you have to be willing to make a fool of yourself if you want to make progress. You have to almost embrace discomfort if you want to progress in anything. Think of that in training. It's like you really didn't get stronger by going in and doing the same easy workout over time. It had to get harder. You had to be uncomfortable at some point to adapt. And I think, that's something that I have really taken to an extreme degree in all things of life that I learned from training. Is like the training that sucked and made me want to quit the most and I stuck to the most was actually the best and most effective for me. And I think I apply that thing when I'm trying to learn something too, is I kind of purposefully overwhelm myself until like I feel like I'm drowning, but there's just enough, like maybe a nostril out so I could still get air and survive. So I think what people need to understand though in that answer is when I'm working with a client, doing something in coaching or even like making a formula or something, those extremes are really only going to apply to me. I'm not going to be that experimental with somebody unless they come to me and they ask for that, because they need to be willing to embrace the chaos of what may happen in the beginning. And if they're not, then I'm going to be a lot more conservative about, okay, you know, we know 99% of the time this works, so we're going to start you on that. Versus if someone is embracing the experimental and they're willing to be like, okay, you know, I have nothing to lose. If I get a little bit weaker, but ultimately there's potential to get a lot stronger, then they're willing to do that. Like that needs to be co-signed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It's that thing of, you know, sometimes not everything is gonna click straight away. Sometimes it's a case of it needs to feel difficult. It needs to, because anything that is new pushes you outside of that comfort zone, and it might feel as though it's a step backward. It's a lot of things that I talk about with clients and have spoken with other coaches is that fact versus feeling. You can feel as though you may be going backwards, but the facts are that, you know, if we're monitoring recovery or fatigue or anything like that, the facts are that, you know, we're heading in the right direction. But it's that feeling of, oh, this is too hard. I never used to do this before. Whereas actually on paper they're heading in the right direction. Have you had experience of that? And with people
100%. Yeah. So it's funny because that actually is something that directly carries over from golf. There's a phrase, "feel isn't real," when they talk about making swing changes, and that's 100% true with I think powerlifting. Is people really have a tendency to overvalue feel versus other things, other, you know, objective or quantifiable measures like velocity or something like that. But the reality is, like, if you look at the general adaptation syndrome, like the graph that basically shows where you are in terms of adapting to any new stimulus, is, you know, there's an alarm phase, and in that alarm phase, after you've introduced this new stimulus, there's a dip, and if you panic at the dip and you pull back, you don't get the adaptation, you don't super compensate. So you have to be willing to see something through. And I think it's, what's funny about it is, when I was first getting into powerlifting as a competitor and as a lifter, not as a coach, I remember at that point sort of the paradigm being that everybody was panicked of overtraining, and so people would do less out of fear that they're overtrained. And I think that has shifted and changed a little bit, but the feel aspect, the reliance on feel, hasn't changed. Whereas I think a lot of really heavily based RPE lifters still overvalue feel. Is like, feel is RPE. And so is riding, as I call the intensity train, where, you know, you're doing low sets, but everything's at 90% plus of RPE. I think it can be effective. I think you can drive adaptation for sure, but I would argue that that's probably not the most sustainable approach versus waving in and out of intensity periods throughout a year. I also would argue that it's very difficult then. What happens when you hit that ceiling, it's a lot harder to add volume in over time. And I think, again, at least what I see when you look at a lot of the athletes who compete under different programming philosophies, I think if you look at the stats, a lot of them tend to hit a ceiling and then plateau and not really continually get better over time. And I think if you look at a lifter like Taylor, what's amazing is he's still getting better.
Yeah, it goes back to what we said about Sheffield. It'd be, you know, exciting to see what happens there. And, you know, a thing that you mentioned right at the start is, you know, trying to find answers rather than, you know, waiting for them, but having that curiosity to find them out and have the answers from there, rather than sort of, you know, you want to keep getting better, you want to keep progressing, you know, rather than that thought process of, all right, well, we've hit that ceiling there, a little bit like what we spoke about in terms of, you know, other limitations there. What can we change, which sort of fuels the thing that has been a common theme throughout the chat, which is, you know, that curiosity. It's got to fuel that desire for progress. And I thought before, when you mentioned about how do you go from competitive to, you know, dominant, is, you know, that's the difference, that's the change. Thanks a lot, Ben, for taking the time to jump on. A lot of tangents thrown in there, but a
Yeah,
lot of good topics
well,
in there.
if I'm an expert in anything, it's hard tangents back and forth.
The last question that I always like to ask is, from everything that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
That's a great question, because I think I did throw a lot in there that maybe didn't land as intended. And I think curiosity will take you far. So be a skeptic, be willing to chase things if they're really important for you, and not give up. Embrace discomfort. And I think honestly, like, if you really like something, want to get better at something, be willing to ask for help and seek help. It doesn't necessarily mean hiring a coach. It means just being willing to feel or look like a fool by asking questions that may seem common sense. Because man, it'll take you far. Like, again, last time I'll mention golf on this, but I think the reason it's so relevant is just that I'm relatively a noob to this, and I think what has changed is I've approached this differently than I have anything else in life, where really right from the beginning, I sought outside help. Like, I went and I took lessons with somebody who is a good golfer. And I think the difference in my rate of progress from the beginning is so dramatically faster than the average person, because I was willing to put my ego aside and say, I don't know, I need help. And I didn't do that in powerlifting, and I was stubborn. And I think I got a lot of answers by going out and saying, I need to get these answers myself. I'm going to figure it out myself. But I may have gotten all those things a lot faster if I did. I mean, I did have powerlifting coaches. I had a bodybuilding coach, but I think I probably could have done a better job, at least of not being, testosterone fueled, stubborn 20-something-year-old. So I think maybe that's a beauty of aging, is openness and willingness to take in outside input and say, I don't know. So I'd say those would be my nuggets and takeaways from the conversation today.
Awesome. I think there was some really good take-home points there, and a phrase that was going around my head then is, you don't know what you don't know. You know, I know you're looking for answers, and I know that's maybe a little bit of a daft saying, but an example that went through my head is, I knocked the bumper off my car a couple of months ago, and in my head I was thinking, well, it must just click back on. It didn't snap off or anything like that. It must just click back on. And it wasn't until a friend came and showed me how to do it. You've got to take it fully off, put it in the middle, and then squeeze the ends in at the side, which I didn't know. But because I was like, I'm a man, this is my car, and I can do this.
And it doesn't look that way. It does. It looks like you just pop it in, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's that thing of, from now with anything, if you're going to go, using the car as an analogy, you wouldn't just pull your car up into the mechanics and start tinkering around. You would go and ask for help. And I think, in certain things it can be, because it's scary when you're starting something new, like what you mentioned about the golf, it can be scary. But, if you're willing to have that curiosity and ask for help, you could probably ask more questions and get more answers, and then develop from there. Because tying it into coaching, I always think coaching is more of a collaboration. There's things there, you're working as a team. It's not a dictatorship. I think sometimes the coach does have to step in and say, no, we're doing this, but it works much better as a team.
Yeah. Last just funny note there is, I remember at one point I had a client, this is years ago, where it was probably 2 weeks we had been working together, and she emailed me after a check-in and said, I don't think this is going to work because you're not disciplining me enough. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's not, because that is not the role that I'm supposed to be taking. I'm not, I'm not your dictator. I'm not going to chastise you and, slap your hand with the ruler when you misbehave. So yeah, I think you're dead on with all that. And yeah, man, it's been great talking, and I hope I didn't tangent too much for people, but it's been a pleasure kind of letting the conversation flow.
Yeah, definitely. No, I love it. I love a tangent. Like I say, that's why I stuck with the name Strength Chat. I think there was a lot of good things that we spoke about there. For anyone listening who might have any questions about what we've spoken about today, or reach out to you, where could people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, I think the best place, I'm not super active on Instagram, but if someone DMs me and has questions or curiosities, that's probably the best place to reach me. Definitely check out the products, the Elemental products. We're in America, elemental.fit, and then elementalformulations.eu for anybody in the EU or the UK. I always mention this, I will continue to mention it. It's because it's sort of this long-term goal that's not happening as fast as maybe I'd like it to, or people may like it to, but I started this other page called Subsci. It's purely a passion project. It's just for supplement. I'm trying to really kind of build this curriculum of helping people understand supplements from the ground up. That's in this progressive way. It's just a time thing where I'm not able to post as much, but I still think there's a lot of value there for free, where it's almost like this educational curriculum that I'm not trying to replace Examine. Examine's wonderful. I would consider it as like an adjuvant to what is being provided, to give context on places like Examine and databases for supplements.
Awesome, 100%. Everyone listening, check out what Ben's mentioned there. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will catch up with you all next week.